suppose I got into falconry through books and television as a kid. I mean, there was already when Craighead George wrote a book called My Side of the Mountain with a falcon in it, and that was filmed by, I think, Disney. So that was in my consciousness, and I was reading a lot too. I read very precociously. The Ames Street Library in Eastern Massachusetts is a richest in design building. It's magnificent architectural hall, full of books from the 19th century that the Ameses, who turned into squires with their money, left there about birds and animals. So they let me into the adult stacks. I did all these 19th century books, falconry and pigeons, things like that, and I got fascinated. Started keeping them myself. I caught my first Kessel with a bow trap made of yardsticks and old badminton netting and lab mouse, and didn't turn back.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, brought to you in part by the fine folks at Marshall Radio Telemetry, the makers of the most carefully engineered and reliable tracking systems available. For more information on Marshall Radio's amazing products, including their GPS system, head to marshallradio.com. And also in part by the Falconry Fund. And the Falconry Fund is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and protecting the various arts and practices of falconry and the cultural and environmental assets that make it possible. For more information on the Falconry Fund, as well as their latest projects, and also to donate, head to falconryfund.org. And this episode is going to be a little bit different format than what you all are used to hearing. However, I think it's a meaningful one, and one that I'm glad that I got the privilege to put together. This is also going to be the last episode in the New Mexico Falconers Association podcast series that I have recently been working on, and you all have been listening to the past handful of weeks here. But while I was down in New Mexico, one person that I kept hearing a lot of the Falconers down there talk about was Steve Bodio, and this is a name that I've also heard come up several different times from other Falconers that I am acquainted with and know, and it became pretty apparent after talking more to Paul and some of these other guys down in New Mexico that this is a guy that's been pretty inspirational to multiple generations of Falconers, not just through his writings, but also through the kindness of sharing his experiences and knowledge with other people. So I kind of wanted to do something a little different for Steve in this episode by getting a few different Falconers to kind of give a testimonial on which particular writings or interactions with Steve that were most impactful to them, as well as share a little bit of knowledge that Steve wanted to impart in the short time that I had to have a conversation with him. So without further ado, I think we'll get started with Paul Domski's testimonial and let him go ahead and share his thoughts. So here we go.
When I was an apprentice, my sponsor lent me a book, Rage for Falcons, and I read that, and I was just blown away by the stories in that book and the style of writing. Steve's writing he's so descriptive, and when you're reading it, you're right there with him, experiencing it, and it's just incredible. And I knew he lived in Magdalena, which is a town about 100 miles south of where I live right now, and I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, at the time, I was really intimidated by the fact of trying to approach someone. Oh, he's an author and he's famous and so on and so forth. But then at some point, I read a second book of his called Quarencia, and that's about his story of how he went from living in the Boston area and ending up in this small little dusty town in the backwoods or the back plains of New Mexico. And it was really fascinating. It covers all aspects of his life, from his relationship with his partner at the time, and his life with dogs and falcons and hawks. And he spends quite a bit of time in that book talking about sighthounds, Salukis and greyhounds and Scott deerhounds and so forth. And I found that whole aspect of hunting to be fascinating. I mean, he spent some time talking about, using the dogs along with the falcon as an ancient means of hunting and kind of resurrecting it in the plains of New Mexico. And I was just fascinated by that. And at the same time, he mentioned one of his mentors, who was also an author, a fellow named Dutch Salmon, who was really big into the sighthound world, and talked about how, Dutch lived in a town called Silver City, which is also in New Mexico. It's about 4 hours from here, out in the Gila region of the state. And it talked about their relationship. Well, at some point, I was on a family vacation with the kids. My kids were little at the time, and we were down in the Silver City area. And I contacted this guy, Dutch. And, before I knew it, my wife and I and the family, we had a sighthound of our own. And we were getting into the whole, running dogs and mixing it with the birds and everything else. And at that point, I had heard through Steve. Steve has a blog, it's called Corencia. And I was a big fan of his blog and reading about it. And he always published these really great articles about these ancient sighthounds from the stands, from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and so forth. And he had brought over a couple of dogs, I think through some connections of his who were Russian. And he had bred a couple of litters, and he had puppies. And I guess I built up my nerve, and I contacted Steve through email, and he was very gracious and very, very open to people coming down and seeing his dogs and talking to him about hunting with dogs and falcons and everything. So we packed up one Saturday, and I don't know, I think it was June of, 2005 or 2006. And my kids, my wife and I, we went down there and we saw these puppies, and before I knew it, we were bringing a puppy home, and our marriage survived that little episode. And, but it was through Steve and through his writing that really a whole chapter and way of life for myself and my family opened. And, it was just the beginning at that point. And since the time of getting our dog from Steve, we've added a bunch of Salukis over the years. I mean, many have come and gone, and we still have 6 that live with us now. And, we're heavily into running Salukis and our love of them. And I really have to, credit Steve and his writings for that. And I think he deserves he's an all-time hero in my book because of that. And just recently I was visiting him, and we spent a couple hours in his library, and he was showing me his natural history books. He has, there's the Archives of Falconry, and Steve has his own archives at his house. And it's truly incredible to go down there and listen to him talk about the people that he knows and the people that he's known over the years, and the experience he's had hunting with different people around the country and around the world. He's just a fascinating person that, forever will inspire me.
And again, everyone, that was Paul Domski, and thank you again, Paul, for contributing to this episode and sharing those thoughts with us, and I'm sure Steve will greatly appreciate them. And next up, we have Matt Mullenix, who has known Steve for a while and is also a friend of the podcast. And once he found out that we were going to be doing this dedication episode, he wanted to contribute some different thoughts and sentiments as well. So with that, here is Matt Mullenix, everyone.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about Steve, who I have known through correspondence and a few visits to Magdalena. Probably, I mean, almost my entire falconry career. I started in the mid '80s in Panama, so it was basically all correspondence. Anytime I talked to any falconer, but when I got up to the States a couple of years later, he was one of the first people that I had read writing about falconry, about contemporary falconry. And also, having the benefit of being alive and having a phone number, and you could actually reach out to him. And then when the internet came along, and this was even early in that, when when there were chat rooms and dial-up connections. He was an early adopter of communication in that format as well. So that was all useful to me in my coming up years. Like a lot of Falconers, I'm 51, so my generation of Falconers, one of the first sort of popular books that we had was A Rage for Falcons, and that was an amazing book for me to read because it was not a manual. It was a legitimate popular book about a sport that I was already invested in. I obviously had not been practicing it long, but I knew it was something I wanted to do forever. And frankly, just having the example of a person who wrote well about falconry, contemporary falconry, and was an adult and was a successful writer, something that I had also aspired to, was hugely inspirational to me. And sort of a guide star, an example of a person who, not only practiced falconry for his life, but had a, incredibly interesting life doing a lot of the things that I and other falconers enjoy doing, just sort of, naturalist type stuff, observations of not just raptors, but all wild birds and wild places. And then as I read more of his writing, his essays, like in On the Edge of the Wild, then he became influential not just as a falconry figure in my life, but also as a writer. And I learned a lot about essay writing. I learned a lot about how to express what he calls writing with trees in it, which is writing that has an outdoors element and also some naturalistic wildlife, also people, and all these things that we're fascinated with that I have always wanted to try to express in my own writing. And all writers do this. They'll find people that seem to speak to them through the pages, and will emulate the style and emulate the ideas, and I know I did that and probably still do that. And you deconstruct the writing too, which I think all writers sort of appreciate, that the next generation is going to do that, is going to take what they write, read it critically, not just for enjoyment, but also to see how he did it. And one of the funny things that admissions that I have had, and I've shared it with other writers, and Steve was my example for this, but it could have been anybody. So you read enough of Steve's work, and you realize he's a working writer, and has spent his life as a working writer. And a working writer does not make up new stuff every single time. So you have great phrases and you have great ideas, and to the extent that you can, you recycle things. And so if you read everything he's written, it's all in my view excellent and worthwhile. But there are themes, and these themes were revisited and reworked. And to me, that was a revelation, because I was under the impression that you had to, basically produce original content. Every single word could not be the same word that you used in the last, sentence, which you might run out of words pretty quickly. So that was important and a relief to me, that you could you could have a finite amount of ideas and revisit them, keep coming back to the well, in a sense, which as I've grown older, I realize is kind of a metaphor for my falconry as well. You keep going back to the well. People are not sort of infinitely variable. We have patterns, and we have interests that sustain us through our lives. Steve's interests have been steady, as long as he's been writing, and I'm sure before this intersection between people and animals and places, and it's all the stuff that I love, and a lot of falconers are drawn to, and what a great gift he's given us to have this volume of literature that so beautifully reflects all these things that we love. Another revelation was that you could be a falconer and not write about falconry in every book. That a working writer was somebody who may be interested in falconry and may practice falconry, but could write well about food and about guns and about wildlife and any subject that sort of meets his fancy and he can find a buyer for. And Steve's covered a lot of ground in that. From basically all of his interests being beautifully well represented from a couple of books of bibliography, which is essentially all the books he's read. He's an unbelievably literate person, and if you've been to his house, I mean, it's like a wizard's cottage, all sorts of little potions and dried specimens on the walls, but books, and shelves and shelves of books, all of which he has read, I'm sure, numerous times, and has probably lost and given away more books than he's got there. But he's a wonderful student of books and a wonderful fan of books in general, and writes, not only introductions to books, which sort of is its own genre that he has that he's done a lot of work in, introducing not just books of literature that he's that were important to him, like Brian Plummer's Tales of a Rat Hunting Man, which is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it to anybody who's a falconer or just likes animals and people and funny period stuff, but wrote a great introduction to that puts it in context. Wrote a great introduction to T.H. White's The Goshawk. His introductions actually comprise almost a collection of these great books, all of which introduced by him. It's super collection, and I recommend them all to you. So there's that. His continuing reflection on appreciation, on being both a foodie without being so sophisticated that he's unapproachable. Gives you an idea, even if you're not into food, what it might be like to really be an appreciator of fine things wherever you find them. And I think both he and his wife Libby, we have had a bunch of fine meals together that they have cooked, but also through his writing, it's obvious that he knows what he's talking about and enjoys it and can write well about it. So back to falconry a bit. Rage for Falcons, a huge influence, and I think. Just to say, I think I read excerpts from it in a Smithsonian article before the book came out, and it had photographs, which you remember all the photographs as a kid as much as you remember the text. Any guy with holding a hawk somehow is indelibly burned into your head. So the illustrations in this magazine article, obviously he was editor of Gray's Sporting Journal, which is a little bit before my time. I wish I had a sort of compendium of all those articles too to go through them, because you realize that there will be at some point a body of Steve's work that's finite, and that's I think for any of your favorite writers, that's a sad idea, that there will come a time when there will be the last word, so I'm hoping and I expect fully to be able to uncover a bunch of stuff that he's written that has just passed me by, and I look forward to diving in again. I would say along the lines of books that are not specifically about falconry, although contain falconry, like sort of every conversation that we might have as falconers is going to range widely from our families and our kids and our pets, and also our falconry, but our work and our travel. All of these things you can read in Steve's work. His book, Querencia, is like I said, I think all of his work is great. I really like the essays. I like the thought pieces. This book, Cadencia, is literature. I mean, it's American literature that I think can go toe to toe with anybody else that was writing it at the time. And a wonderful story of loss about his first wife who passed, and the adventures that they had together. So a memoir, very very moving, and absolutely worth reading. As personal observation, I made, I guess, my first trip down to see him quite a while ago. It might have been 20 years ago, and then made another trip a couple of years ago, and it was, of course, it's amazing to read about a place that he's been writing about, this little tiny village in New Mexico, and then to realize it is actually even smaller than you imagined. It's like 4 streets, most of them dirt. And when he says he walks to the spur, this little bar at the end of his street, he walks to the spur. It's a little bar at the end of his street. It's just wonderful to realize that you are in the place that you sort of knew from the books. And it is, comfortably, as you imagined it, if not a little bit, more comfortable. And his house is difficult to describe. It's he calls it the little rock house, but it's like an adobe structure, several rooms, wood stove, usually a hawk in the kitchen, dogs on the sofa, books everywhere, and quite an experience to visit. Quite a lot of long hours discussing authors and books and just trying to drink it all in. My last visit, Steve has suffered from his Parkinson's for some years now, and that's become more debilitating to him, which is hard to see. But you could see it's the same guy behind the eyes, and the same guy in the conversation. And when he gets going, it's the same guy that you remember. And I certainly hope that'll continue for many years. I know he's fully engaged in his own treatment and is taking care of his health. And certainly wish him all the best for that. I can say with tremendous gratitude how generous Steve has been to me personally, as a reader of things that I've written and an editor of things that I have written. He wrote a wonderful introduction to In Season, a book I wrote mainly about my kids growing up in falconry, and we've collaborated on a blog for a number of years with Kat Urbicut and Reed Farmer, and that was a lot of fun, and that gave me a lot of sort of confidence and leeway to write about stuff, or to pretend like I was writing like him, and sort of tool up all the themes and try to learn from his responses how to operate. And this was early in the blog world. Again, he was always an early adopter on technology, even though he would tell you he's a man of the 18th and 19th century, but he's got a good grasp of how to communicate and what are the I mean, and as a writer, obviously you would expect that, but you don't always expect that he would be so engaging and so open. Some writers are, especially Western writers, famously reclusive, and he is, if anything, famously not reclusive, but very engaged and very engaging, and very willing to not only have visitors, but to take calls and to take emails and to respond generously at length. He's read full manuscripts of mine and gotten back to me quickly with incredibly detailed feedback, which is, for a writer, it's it's impossible to put a value on that. And also generously, he's sent me manuscripts before they were published. And so I've had the rare treat of being able to read, for example, his Tiger Country, first foray into sort of long form fiction, when it was just print out from his computer, and the Hounds of Heaven, which is a book about the type of dog, the sighthounds that he loves, and their sort of Far Eastern origins. About Hounds of Heaven, I was listening to there's an audio version of it, and I was listening to that as I was driving out to see him this last trip, and it had been a while since I had read it, and I had never listened to it. But I was, shocked and surprised, and again, just unbelievably grateful. So he ends the book with a quote from me that he must have received in an email in our long correspondence, and it was me, trying to be witty and literary, and he teased apart the best parts of whatever it was that I had written him, and closed his book with that, which to me that lasts forever. That lasts forever. So I know Steve is a huge part of a lot of Falconers, sort of literary and imaginative and relationship lives. He's definitely a part of mine for all those reasons, and always will be. And it's an honor to know that he's written things that have my name on it, and my name's in things he's written, and to feel like you're a part of that, that you only knew from afar at first, and through Steve's generous acceptance and outreach and tutelage, mentorship, has been able to share with people.
All right, and again, everyone, those were some kind words and thoughts shared by our friend Matt Mullenix, and thank you again, Matt, for your interest and participation in this episode. It is definitely much appreciated, and we have one more person that wanted to share some other thoughts as well, and once she found out that we were doing this episode, was also very eager to contribute. And the person I'm speaking of course, is Lauren McGough, who has also known Steve for quite a while and credits Steve for a lot of her initial interest in falconry. Take it away, Lauren.
I was first introduced to Steve through his book, A Rage for Falcons. A lot of falconers, their first spark in the sport is finding a book. And for me, it wasn't My Side of the Mountain. It was A Rage for Falcons. That was in my school library. I was at Holloman Air Force Base. My dad was in the Air Force when I was 13 in New Mexico by the town of Alamogordo. And that school library actually had A Rage for Falcons. And I picked it up. I had this idea that falconry existed, but I didn't quite realize it was something that one could actually do. It wasn't just a pastime of medieval knights in Britain. And when I read his book, that was the spark that made me go, oh my God, I can actually do this. And it's happening all around me here in the US, even in New Mexico, because of course he was only a few hours away from me in Magdalena, New Mexico. So I read that book, absolutely devoured it. And it's, for those that haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a series of vignettes from his experiences in falconry over the decades. I remember he has a chapter about raising a prairie falcon, pulling it from the eyrie and raising it, and he called it Grendel, I think. So it also gave you, it wasn't a how-to book, and it gave you this window into what it was actually like to be a falconer. And reading that, I just came away with, oh my God, I want to be a falconer. And as I started to cast a wider net on falconry, I was in the beginning, always interested in golden eagles and anything cultural involving travel, Central Asia. And so this was the year 2000. So there was almost nothing out there on the internet about eagle hunters in Mongolia. I mean, nothing. Except for Steve. Steve had written a piece, it was in The Atlantic, about his trip to visit the eagle hunters in Mongolia. And he was one of the very first Western falconers to go there after Mongolia really swung open its doors for tourism. So after I read that book, I found that article and realized that he was one of the only English language voices out there that had actually experienced this amazing form of falconry. And I just knew I wanted to see it and I would love to talk to this guy. So my dad our whole family moved to Oklahoma City when I was 14. So we left New Mexico. And when we moved to Oklahoma, I wrote him a letter, like so this was 2001, actual like piece of paper that I put my own words on. It seems so novel now. And I can't remember how I got his address, but I had found it somewhere. And so I wrote him a letter and I said, hey, I'm just starting my falconry apprenticeship in Oklahoma. Your book was my favorite book. P.S. I would love to go to Mongolia. Could you help me out at all? And I've still got the copy of it somewhere because he wrote me back. A week or two later, a letter showed up from Steve. And it's something I will always, I hold him in high esteem for many reasons, but one in particular is the fact that he wrote this kid back after she sent him a letter, and took me very seriously. I would cringe to look back on what I actually wrote as a 14-year-old, but the way that he wrote me back was like a peer and another falconer and somebody that could go to Mongolia, because I had expressed this interest to my friends and family around me. And it's not that they dismissed it, but to them, it all sounded a little crazy. And Steve was an adult that thought, absolutely excellent idea. You want to go to Mongolia? I will help you get there. And so he sent me a manuscript of his book, Eagle Dreams. So he wrote that article for The Atlantic, but he was in the process of writing a whole book about his experience, which I also highly recommend. So I had this, it was actually a PDF that he emailed to me later, which I printed out and I hole punched and put in a binder. So I had this unpublished book, and he also sent me the contact information for his guides in Mongolia that actually picked him up at the airport and did the legwork to find serious eagle hunters. And so I've had many kind people in my life. My dad is another one. So we took that information, and when I graduated high school, or no, just before I graduated high school. So my dad took me to Mongolia in 2004, based entirely on all this information that Steve had given us. And I talked to Steve on the phone. My dad talked to Steve on the phone. He really helped us put together a good idea of how to do this. And at the time, even 2004, again, there was no resources to look up, where there was hardly any tourism in Mongolia at all. The festival had just started. It began in 1999, and only a ragtag bag of tourists ever showed up. And so it was very much to the Western world, a hidden thing. And then when I was in college, I drove through New Mexico and asked if I could come visit him. And oh my gosh, it was great. He said, absolutely, of course. And so I went to Magdalena, which is just a stunning hamlet there in the mountains. It's really a special place, very reminiscent of Central Asia. I always like going there because it's that shrub steppe with some gentle mountains that remind me so much of the Altai Mountains. Like when you're out there, I feel like there should be some yurts on the landscape, and the cowboys saddling up with their eagles to go riding. So it's very suited for Steve. And they're very, what's the word? Very strong memories for me every time I got to visit Steve, because I learned so much. I would spend, so this first time I spent, I think 2 days there, and it was like a flood of information on Tazzis, because at that time he was starting in on his next project, which was the Sighthounds of Central Asia, primarily called Tazzis and Tigans. And so we talked about that. He has connections to every interesting person. I mean, a great moniker for Steve would be the most interesting man in the world. He knows everybody that knows something really fascinating. He knows this paleontologist or this ecologist or this novelist or anything that you can have an interest in. He knows somebody that's pursued it. I remember I mentioned snow leopards in passing, and he said, "Oh, my friend Cy Montgomery is planning a trip to Mongolia to go write a book on snow leopards." It's like, what? And like even like he did in the letter, meeting me as however old I was then, 19, 20, 21. He treated me like I was intelligent, and I was an adult, and I knew about all these things, even though I often had no idea about any of them. But I always appreciated that. I mean, his interests span anything even tangentially related to birds of prey, raptors, history, ecology, human evolution. He's a library. I mean, his house is a library, and then literally he's a library of information. So it's almost, I'd go there for a few days and just be kind of in awe at everything that I learned. And even it was almost like a storybook, in that there's the Golden Spur there in Magdalena. It's the only bar in town. It's a very, very authentic cowboy bar. He walks in there, he knows everybody, and they're all old time cowboys, ranchers, people with ties to the land. And then you'll have an oddball, actor that shows up in there, or all walks of life. So he felt like, I felt like an anthropologist, and he felt like my guide, keeping me right and helping me understand the inner workings of this little town. I could totally see how and why he fell in love with it. So I would visit him every so often for, more than a decade. It's crazy. It's 2021 now. So I've been corresponding with Steve for 20 years. And I've probably visited him 10 times. And every time I learned something new and amazing. I became really fascinated by crowned eagles, and particularly the role they may have played in our evolution, because they're primate hunters. That's what they evolved to do. And that included, a couple million years ago, our early hominid ancestors. There's a famous skull that has crowned eagle talon marks in it that was one of our relatives, the Tong child. So I might mention this to him, and then all of a sudden, he tells me about this trip he took to Africa and the crowned eagles he saw there, and he knows this anthropologist and this museum curator, and it's very, very cool. And I should say, so I ended up going back to Mongolia for a bit. When I graduated college, I got a Fulbright scholarship to live there for a year. Again, only because of Steve's initial kindness and contacts, that he helped my dad and I go there for a quick trip. and then me build a whole case for this grant money to go there for a year. And my idea was to apprentice under them for a whole season and do everything like they do. Yeah, trap an eagle, train it their way, have a mentor, hunt foxes. And so I would email. So every so often during my year there, it was a 5-hour drive from Bayanolgi, the provincial capital, to where we hunted and lived with my nomadic eagle hunters. And then an hour from there was an internet cafe. And every month or 2 months, depending on how long I could stand it, I could go back to the internet cafe, and I would type out an email to Steve, and I would send him photos of, this is the eagle we trapped, or this is her first fox. And he was such a cheerleader throughout the whole experience, which again, you can't put words on that, because I was, even though it seems like a ballsy thing to go out there and do that, I was still very insecure in my language ability and my horse riding ability, that I was being a good falconer while I was out there, that I was respecting the culture like I should. And he would get these photos and put them on his blog and just, I want to say, gush about them, and only in just a way that you might want your dad or your relative or somebody to be proud of you. So I always felt like he was proud of me, which again, just goes a long way. And through our relationship, he's also given me a lot of confidence to continue to pursue the strange things that really fascinate me and ask for funding to do it. And even in my own personal falconry, since most falconers will be aware, the eagle falconry niche is a very masculine, there can be a lot of infighting. It's a hard niche to break into, and he's always supported me in a way that also has given me confidence just in my own falconry that I enjoy. It's a great guy. I have a lot of love for Steve. I'm so glad he moved out to New Mexico and found that hamlet out there. And Libby as well. I mean, they're such a great pair. Libby, the daughter of famous mountaineers. I'm a little ignorant on the mountain climbing aristocracy that she is from. But I mean, it's just a perfect fit. She would always make really amazing breakfast, nice, hearty, and when you're in Mongolia, it's so cold there, and it's a very animal-based diet. Because the land's not arable, they can't really grow fruits and vegetables. So all their vitamins and minerals they get from animal products. So you eat every part of the animal, and then there's dairy and cheese. So the breakfasts in Mongolia are very hearty and meat heavy, and the breakfasts at Steve's house are very much the same. And, gosh, it is just like Central Asia out there. And then we would have vodka in the evenings, either inside the library there at his house or at the spur. He always just had little shots of vodka, which would make any self-respecting Kazakh eagle hunter proud. So yeah, I don't know if you've ever had 48 hours of amazing conversation with somebody. Steve and Libby, I struggle to think of any other dear friends I have where we can just talk about all the animal and travel related things that fascinate us for hours at a time. And so I also always come away from Steve energized about the next project or the next thing I want to do. He relatively recently published a book called An Eternity of Eagles, which is about the whole sociocultural history of eagles and humans. Great book, fascinating. And I was so excited to get it and read it, and he didn't tell me this, but when I opened it, it was dedicated I was one of the people to whom it was dedicated, which is one of the nicest things that's ever happened to me. I can't really believe that anybody would write a whole entire book and think of me and have me in the dedication. So that really meant a lot also. The great thing about our sport is that we get to meet the people that we do in it. And I'm so glad Steve has made a career out of writing about falconry and birds of prey and wild places, because it has inspired me in so many different ways. And I would not have met him were it not for those words that really spoke to me. So Steve Bodio is a treasure to the falconry community, and I would encourage anybody that has enjoyed his books to correspond with him via email. He's always worth a good conversation, and he knows so much that you never know where that conversation will go or how it will inspire you in your pursuits in life. So yeah, I love Steve.
Very well said, Lauren, and thank you again for your contribution to this episode as well. And even though it's already been said, another big thank you to those that took the time to contribute to this episode and all the other falconers that were involved in helping make this New Mexico Falconers Association podcast series possible. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to come down and record these episodes and get a chance to share the history of falconry in your state with the rest of the world. And once again, if any other state club is listening that wants to have some of their state's falconry history chronicled through some different podcasts with some of their club members, feel free to hit us up and we'll see what we can work out with you. We would love the chance to help you share some of your state's falconry history with the rest of the world. So on an ending note, after hearing these testimonials, it's only fitting that we spend the last couple minutes here hearing some imparting wisdom from Steve Bodio himself. Thank you all again so much, as always, for tuning in. And until next time, hope you all are having a great falconry season. Happy hawking. See you again soon. Thank you. What piece of knowledge would you impart on all the newer generations getting into the sport?
Always listen to the bird. Always listen to the bird. Listen to the dogs. Don't tell them what to do. Listen to them. You can tell them what to do after you've done that a long time. Listen to the bird. The bird will tell you the truth. A bird will try to do something you think is wrong. Try to figure out what it is, why they're doing it. Often they have a reason to do it. They'll end up with catching more game if you listen to it. If it's hungry, it'll always work. It's honest. It's an honest animal. I guess you also have to be disciplined in what you give them for food. Don't just feed them like that. Bird was being overfed enormously by my dog. But again, I built an alliance between the bird and dog that was that durable. So I don't feel bad about it. I just feel amused by it. I have no wisdom at all. I'm the poorest person in the world. I'm a happy person, though. I have bad disease, and I'm had it for 11 years, and I'm a wreck. I don't have much money, and I have a pretty good life still.